Good day, I am Dr. Garcia and I will be discussing with you qualitative research designs. So for this session, everyone is invited or is encouraged to be able to define qualitative research, differentiate between qualitative and quantitative designs, discuss the role or importance of qualitative research in healthcare or health sciences, and discuss the different approaches to qualitative research, as well as the strategies in evaluating them and the ethical considerations involved. First, let's define what is qualitative research. Terry Pratchett put it best when he said the best research you can do is talk to people. This basically sums up qualitative research in a nutshell because it primarily is a systematic collection or system of exploring meanings of social phenomena. It is basically derived from talk or conversation rather than numerical data. It can also be defined as a way of doing research without necessarily counting. It's an interpretative approach to data collection on basically how people make sense of the world. Okay, so it's basically research delving on human phenomena, human events, vis-a-vis or without the use of statistical data. This in turn tells us the features of qualitative research, in which it is basically more focused on classification rather than enumeration and counting, hence its taxonomic nature. It is about questioning norms or assumptions on human behavior. It studies people in day-to-day natural settings, and it employs various methods to gain deeper insight on the human experience. Now let's go to the main differences between qualitative and quantitative research. Now from the diagram here, you can clearly see the basic differences between qualitative and quantitative research. But to put it simply, here is a table comparing the two based on the aspects stated. So first, this is the objective. So qualitative research is basically concerned about exploring meaning, gaining a deeper understanding on phenomena, whereas your quantitative research is about testing hypotheses. The data obtained or collected in qualitative research concerns text or verbal data, whereas quantitative research designs often dwell on numbers. The nature of qualitative research is more descriptive, whereas your quantitative is both descriptive and analytic. Okay, so when you analyze qualitative research, it's also more thematic, whereas your quantitative data can be analyzed through statistics. Methods in qualitative research are also more flexible and exploratory, whereas your quantitative research designs often have a certain structure and are controlled. Now, the findings of qualitative research, since the data you've collected is textual and descriptive, is the same, whereas your quantitative data can be generalizable and quantifiable. Alright, which is not to say that your qualitative research data research findings are not generalizable or usable in the bigger population. It's just that based on the data you've gathered, your quantitative data seems to be a bit stronger in its applicability because of the rigidness or the definitiveness of the data, because it's based on numbers. Now, your qualitative data practically is used to develop theories and understanding phenomena, whereas your quantitative research designs establish relationships and test theories. So your causality is more determined in quantitative research designs rather than your qualitative. So why then do we do qualitative research? So as humans, specifically us in the healthcare field, one of our roles is understanding the human experience as it is, no? So we can better help our patients or each other. This is where qualitative research comes in. So it can serve as a preliminary or a baseline to quantitative research, while it also validates quantitative research in a way. It provides a different perspective uh, on some phenomena that can be studied quantitatively. So it basically here is what is highlighted is the supportive role of your qualitative to your quantitative research designs. It is an essential part in health services research, particularly those areas which cannot be quantified. It concerns issues regarding doctor-patient interactions, such as the patient's perceptions of the care given or the services given, the factors affecting healthcare workers as they give the service, and the perceptions of workers on their practice and working relationships with colleagues. It is also used to identify obstacles and barriers to practice change and assessment of new technology. And in psychiatry, it is widely used to develop knowledge in areas poorly understood and those areas which are too complex for quantitative research alone. Next, let's go to the different study designs classified as qualitative. Now in this slide, I would like to share the Ferris wheel model of approaches in qualitative research. As you notice, it's a bit complex in a way. It's not a diagram or a flow chart as one would normally see in the classification of the other research designs, specifically in the quantitative realm. The concept behind this is that the researchers can technically enter any car, which are these rectangles here, or any stage of the research. And then, like riding a Ferris wheel, you get on, regardless of whatever car you are, and then you have to complete the ride if ever you want to change. This basically describes how qualitative research designs are made, no? So you can enter a study using one method or using one goal in mind, and then after completing your data from there, you can actually go into another method or another area of study on that particular topic, and then do it all over again. The basic concept being that you have to complete one whole cycle of a particular method or objective before moving on to the next. So this is where its flexibility and its highly variable nature comes from, specifically because in human experiences, you cannot really predict what happens at the onset, no, at the start. There can be a lot of variables that can change at whatever point in time, hence the need to adopt other methods. But for the purposes of our discussion, we will be focusing on three designs, specifically ethnography, grounded theory, and phenomenology. I will also mention other designs later on, but let's focus on these three. Okay, so ethnography is basically the study of a social group or social system. Grounded theory is developing theory from data, or as the term implies, it's theory grounded on data. And phenomenology, which is basically the study of how or what meanings do people give to their experiences or to certain phenomena. Let's begin with ethnography. So as the term implies, so from, if you can surmise, it's from ethnic, no? So it studies the structure and function of a group of people, giving us a holistic picture of a social group, and it describes aspects of the cultural and social system of that particular group. It is any small-scale research carried out in everyday settings, and it involves a long-term physical and or virtual observation. So we put in the word virtual because in recent years, of course, we've seen a shift from purely face-to-face to digital research or digital interaction. So this by saying this, of course, we are also taking into account that you can also do this study virtually. Okay, it Its methods mainly involve observations and interviews, and it's usually used in healthcare research as a way to study health beliefs and practices. Okay, so this slide basically tries to tell you the steps or the process behind the ethnography or an ethnographic research. Don't worry, I won't ask you to memorize it, but I just want you to see that there's also a system. So basically, after you've identified your question, the specific setting of your research, you have to formulate your methods, basically how you want to effectively obtain the most information. And next, you acquire permissions and access. No, it can be a bit intrusive, especially for groups that are not very socially open to receiving strangers. So you have to apply for the appropriate permits or permissions before you're able to do this type of research. Now, this particular design requires more than just observation. So you may want to participate in organizations before you proceed with your data gathering, which is which consists of interviewing and observing that group, and eventually gaining more data by looking at archives or other information related to that group. The last step is probably the step that is more commonly seen in qualitative research, which is coding and analyzing your data. When you say coding, that's basically labeling or grouping things together, sort of sorting. Okay, so you sort through and you sift through your data, you find commonalities so that you can group them together and then analyze them that way. Okay. Next is your grounded theory. Now, grounded theory research aims to develop a middle-range theory grounded on data that has been collected, generating relevant and particularly an applicable theory using analytic explanations. It is exploratory, iterative, inductive, abductive, comparative, systematic, flexible, and geared towards theory construction. Now, those terms I've mentioned basically are concerned with the process of developing grounded theory, which we will not be discussing here in detail, okay? Because it more of belongs in the realm of social research. Now, it's basically used in sociology as one of its most successful methodologies. And in healthcare, it explores the social experiential aspects of health, illness, and the body. Now, how do we do grounded theory? Basically, again, so I mentioned already coding. Basically, you develop a theory through collecting data, comparing data with codes, and then seeing if there's an emerging concept. So from there, you look at the concepts, you compare them with existing ones, and the cycle repeats until you have a very well-defined theory. Don't worry, I won't be focusing on this too much. Another way of looking at it is like this. So basically, before you do your grounded theory, you have to prepare by minimizing your preconceived notions or knowledge of that particular phenomena or area of study. Not necessarily do you have to get rid of it, but you have to understand and take note of any preconceived notions you have before beginning such a research. That way, when you collect data, you remove some of your bias. Now, it says here that you do theoretical sampling. So basically, you don't do random sampling for this particular design. So you have to carefully select your sample. And after you collect your data, you analyze and you do what is called memoing. Now, when you do memoing, it's basically a write-up of ideas and the codes. So basically, when you've already written down data, so you have your notes, no, based on the data you've gathered, and then you memo it. So once you do your memos, you then proceed to theoretical outline. So you look at your notes, you see if there's any pattern or any theory that might arise or any concepts that might arise. And then you do the outline. After which you do resorting again. conceptually, and then you proceed to writing your theory. So in grounded theory research, actually researchers go through several cycles of number 4, 5, 6, even number 3, before they finally do number 7, or the writing of the actual theory. Again, I will not be focusing on this too much. This is just something for you to see, so that you can be assured that, of course, in qualitative data, there is still a process. Now, how do we evaluate grounded theory research? First is, do the categories fit, or does the data fit into the coded categories? Does it work? Does the theory explain, interpret, or predict future behavior? Is it relevant to the area or topic of concern? And is the theory modifiable? Meaning, if new data emerges, is it possible that the theory can also evolve with the data? Okay, so don't dwell on this too much. Also, we won't be particularly focusing on this because this is more relevant in sociologic research. Now let's go to phenomenology. It is now the study of how people put together the phenomena as they experience it in a way that it makes sense to them. It assumes a commonality of perspective or view. So it involves a particular concept which is called bracketing, in which a researcher sets aside prejudgments and preconceptions. So it seems sort of similar with how you start a grounded theory research. So when you undergo phenomenologic data gathering or studies, bracketing is necessary. Now, phenomenology by itself is not a specific research design, and it is often compatible, or it's necessary to involve other designs or other methods. It preferably uses non-structured or semi-structured interviews, meaning unlike in quantitative research, that the questions are predefined. Sometimes when doing this type of research, you have to evolve and see where the data takes you. Now, when you collect your data, you have a concept which is called your triangulation, and it is represented in this particular diagram. Now, here you can see how triangulation works. So you basically have a wide base of data, and then by applying your imaginative variation, reduction, your bracketing, you come up with a report or a synthesis of the experiences or the data gathered to come up with your research findings. Now, other approaches under the realm of qualitative research are as follows. So you have historical research, which is a systematic investigation of past events and how it impacts the present. Narrative research, which is basically understanding experiences through narratives. Case studies are also considered as part of the qualitative realm, especially when it's just an in-depth examination of a phenomenon. And of course, you have a mixed methods approach, wherein you combine your quantitative and qualitative designs. Now let's look further at how we look at the quality of your qualitative research. Okay. Now, qualitative research, as you've seen, seems like it's quite unstructured. It's very free thinking, free falling, but it really involves a certain discipline in order for you to produce data that can be used later on, or that can be useful in other settings. Now, I present to you some ways by which we can guarantee quality of qualitative study. So I will be presenting two to you, but don't worry, again, this is just a guide for you in case you may want to undergo qualitative research in the future, as to what questions need to be asked in the various parts of your research design. Okay, so I won't be dealing on this, but basically I will summarize what are the commonalities between the two. So this one is from Malterud. This is the second set. Okay. And this is another way of looking at it. This one naman is divided into two, the methodological rigor and the interpretative rigor. So these are questions that can be asked when you look at qualitative research to determine the quality. Okay? So what are the commonalities? So first is the methodological choices or the framework of the study. It has to be carefully selected. So you can guarantee the best quality of data that will come out of your research. Again, in qualitative research, it often doesn't involve just one method or just one particular approach. It can be a combination. It can evolve over time. In qualitative research, it involves prolonged engagement in fieldwork. Again, you're studying the human experience, the human phenomenon. So you really have to be engaged and you have to be in the field in order to produce quality results. Now, since your data is mostly descriptive, rich and thick descriptions are highly valuable. So when you describe a certain feeling or certain response of the group or the people in question, you just have to collect everything, you just write everything down, and then you sort it out later because you're really not sure which can be useful or not to your data. Now, a solid framework or a solid means of interpreting and evidence later on is important in maintaining the rigor or the structure of your design. So you really have to determine early on how you're going to interpret or code, how you're going to group your data, how you're going to go about your thematic analysis of the data. Now, we've mentioned here reflexivity, which is mentioned in one of the earlier guidelines, which is basically how the researchers' characteristics or ideas, their thoughts figure into the research and how you can either remove or insert them methodologically so that your data is stronger. And then you've also mentioned the theory of triangulation, wherein you start with a wide base of data and then by employing reduction or interpretation, you come up with a synthesis to finally produce whatever is your intended result, whether it's an explanation of the phenomenon, a description of a certain ethnic group, or a theory. Now let's go to the ethics of qualitative research. Now, same with quantitative research, there is of course ethics involved because you're dealing with human participants. So although it may seem easy in a way that you're just interviewing people, you're talking to people, you're interacting to people, there are a lot of ethical considerations as it concerns both participants and the researchers. Now, I will be discussing some common issues generated by two particular areas of the research, which is the place or the setting of the research itself, and the timing within the research process. Now, let's start with the place of research or the setting. So one of the common issues is what you call a therapeutic misconception. So oftentimes when you do any research, there is a notion among the participants that if they participate, that means they can get cured or they will be able to get medical treatment, which is not always the case. As mentioned earlier, qualitative research is basically involved in observing, interacting with people. So there might be some misconception with the participants in that regard. Kasi as researchers, you're basically there as observers, so you're not allowed to intervene. Okay? There's also what you call institutional vulnerability, in which some participants may feel a sense of obligation to join your research, particularly because, for example, they're admitted in your hospital or they belong to a certain community or support group. There's also a problem between cross-cultural differences in terms of linguistic translation and cultural translation as well. So there are some questions or some approaches that might not be received well depending on the culture of your population or your sample. So it's very important to take this into consideration. Same with the meaning of practices. Okay, so some participants may feel that their giving of consent equates to asserting their autonomy. So some of them may refuse to give you consent on certain issues just because they want to show you who's in charge. And of course, there's also the issue of overlapping jurisdictions, in the sense that, especially for those researches that involve multiple localities or settings, there might be many ethics review committees in play, and there are different regulations also that you need to follow. And in the realm of cyberspace, of course, there's always the issue of consent, right? I think this was mentioned also in another lecture, that consent is important regardless of the setting. So whether it's face-to-face, consent is important. The only issue with online research is how do you get consent? How will you document it? And your access to your participants, especially now that basically your whole life can be online. So where do you draw the line in terms of your access to the participants? Can you just reach out to them via Facebook, Instagram? Are you allowed to do that? Okay. Where and when can we draw the line? Now, these are just some of the recommendations presented from the source, okay, which is a SAGE Handbook on Qualitative Methods in Research. Health research, basically. So first is you have to convey important content-based information. So when you're getting consent, you have to explain fully to your patient what their role is, what is expected of them, what is the extent of their participation, so that you have to explain that you will not be giving certain treatments, and if you have to intervene, that this is outside the realm of your research. In terms of institutional vulnerability, some recommendations include involving consultants or third-party groups to offer an outsider's perspective. So, to be fair to those within your institution or your handled group, a third-party group might have to come in order to ensure that there are no rather there is no manipulation, there's no abuse from any party. Okay. Next is, of course, how do you be culturally appropriate with your research. Now, you have to look at your practices, your methodology, and you have to be familiar with the local milieu or the local cultural milieu. So what you can do is, especially if you're conducting this in another country or a community, geographically isolated community in which the culture is different from yours, you can get in touch with local officials, leaders of that group, or even ask help from the local ethics review committee that you're applying to, in order to ensure that your approach is accepted. It's not insulting, or it's not violating any of their beliefs. Now, on the issue on different ethics reviews committees having jurisdiction, the researchers unfortunately have to serve another role, which is as mediators. So you have to understand the regulations between which, and you have to determine a common ground or a common place, or even a compromise, just so you can you can ensure that you're not violating any of the regulations. Now, for online research, as again I've mentioned, consenting needs to be documented, whether it's written or non-written. So verbal consent in qualitative research can be given in certain cases. Just make sure that you have the adequate documentation. If you're unsure of this, you can also consult your ethics review committee as to how they would recommend you go about this. Now, in terms of timing within the research process itself, so there are two. Before the research begins, some of the issues include prior consent and recontacting former participants. So when we say prior consent, in qualitative research, you often go to a certain setting that you want to observe. Okay, since you want to observe and not introduce any bias, okay, it doesn't make sense that you get consent right there and then. Why? Because when you get consent, of course, the participants are going to be aware that, oh, I'm going to be studied. You don't want that. So you want your data as pure as possible. So the issue here is whether you get prior consent, how do you get it? And if ever I am really expected to get this, how am I supposed to go about it without my participants being biased? In terms of recontacting former participants, this comes towards the end of the study in which you may have to go back to some of your participants to verify some data. Like for example, if you review your notes and you find that they said that they were affected by this phenomena in a certain way, you want more details on that. The issue here is, are you allowed to contact them again, especially since the study has ended? Basically, your contract has ended. So there's also an ethical issue in that. Now, there's also some considerations after the data is collected. So number one is local confidentiality. This concerns topics of study that are very sensitive. So some of your participants may divulge certain personal information that can be damning to them or that could be damaging to them in their community. All right, so how do you protect them from this? And of course, there's the whistleblowing. So during the course of your observation, you may find that there are certain issues or certain incidents that may require further intervention or that may require you reporting certain things to authorities. So there's also ethical considerations in this. Remember, you are a researcher, your role is an observer. But how and where do you draw the line between your ethical and moral responsibilities and your responsibility to your data or to your research? So these are the recommendations. So for the issue of getting prior consent, you may want to consider a waiver of consent or blanket consent prior to your research implementation. Now which one is more appropriate to research? It's probably dependent on your ethics approval. So your ethics review committee can either recommend that you do a blanket consent or a waiver of consent. Of course, you can also devise your own system or decide on your own which is more appropriate. But again, it's always prudent to consult with them, especially for groups that are very vulnerable. Now, for recontacting patients after the study has ended, it's always prudent to allow patients to opt in or out of doing this. So when you get your consent or you explain to them what you're doing, once you explain to them what you're doing, you always offer the option that they can decline at any point. Now, if you want to get their consent before the start, it's often prudent to make what is called a supplemental consent. So it is actually an attachment to your original consent stating that you may need to recontact them further if they are willing for further data that you may want to get. Now, it's always prudent to ensure confidentiality and privacy of participants. So how do you do this? You code their data. Don't put any identifiers again. Now, for sensitive data, you may have to acquire legal assurances. So if you're looking at, for example, extrajudicial killings, so you may want to consult a lawyer before you interview victims, you interview their families, you interview the perpetrators, so you can find out what legal machinations or legal documents or laws or policies are there to protect you and your subjects. All right. Now, upon exploring this, you have to determine also amongst yourselves, if you're a group of researchers, which parts you need to intervene in. Now, if there's, again, any questions, you may refer to your ethics review board if you need further assistance. But still, as doctors, of course, our obligation is for the safety of our participants. So just keep that in mind when you're considering this. So that's all for my lecture. So here are my references. Thank you, and if you have any questions, you may email me or contact me through Canvas. Thank you for your time and attention.